It's the Growing for Market podcast.
For farmers who are thinking that they can figure it all out themselves, yeah, it's true, you probably can, but it's really nice to connect with a human being who also has a brain. Add more brains to your problems. There's so many problems to solve in farming, from spreadsheet to bank accounts to oil change on the tractor. So if you can outsource some of the mental load onto TA providers, or at least just have a person to bounce your ideas off of. Sometimes growers call me and just say, hey, I'm thinking about doing that. And then you talk through it. And really, I don't help at all. I'm just listening. And they come up with a solution. It's just nice to have a person. So if you meet a TA provider that just doesn't fit the bill or isn't a good fit, I guess I'm encouraging folks not to give up and just look for someone else or keep trying with them. There will be people who will come to your corner, and then that's just super nice and less lonely that way.
Hello and welcome to the Growing for Market podcast, where we talk about growing, marketing, and the business of growing flowers and vegetables for local markets. I'm Andrew Mefford, your host and the editor of Growing for Market magazine, proudly celebrating 35 years in 2026 as the magazine by and for vegetable and flower market farmers. If you're enjoying the podcast, just wait till you see the magazine. Go to growingformarket.com for more. Also, if you could give us a follow and a rating, it really helps other like-minded people find the podcast. And now, let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free.
Kate here from Foraged and Sown.
Tanner Johnson, Theo's Harvest.
Emily at Frayed Knot Farm.
David Morkel from Morkel Meadows.
Having healthy transplants is really important.
And since we started using tilth, our plants look so much better.
Year after year, just makes everything easier.
The release of the nutrients in the compost base, we find the amount of juice perfect.
They're coming out of the nursery so much faster.
Germinate well, but also build really healthy rootstock.
Healthy plants, whether they're just staying in the cell trays for a couple of weeks, or if the plants are staying in pots for a couple of months.
We are able to have a little bit more flexibility in when we get the transplants out. Seedlings can last a lot longer in the trays without having to add fertility.
I just can't say enough.
And that's what tilth soil is for us, is it's that top tier tool, and it's been exactly what we need it to be. It's been forgiving. It's been scalable.
It's just been a great partnership.
It's been a total game changer. We're super grateful for the work they're doing at Tilth.
This episode is sponsored by Nifty Hoops. Nifty Hoops designs and builds high tunnel systems for growers who want dependable results. What stands out is that Nifty Hoops tunnels are complete systems designed by experienced builders with the details worked out ahead of time. That means the core components are included from the start, like end walls, ventilation, doors, baseboards, and double-layer poly, rather than being added later. The tunnels are designed for real wind and snow loads, efficient assembly, and long service life. You can choose a self-build kit with guidance from written manuals and videos, or a community build where Nifty Hoops works alongside you and the project gets completed in one day. Nifty Hoops has built more than 1,500 hoop houses across the country, including many funded through the NRCS High Tunnel Initiative. They're known nationwide for predictable outcomes and ongoing support. If you're planning a high tunnel project and want it done right, you can learn more at niftyhoops.com. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Sarah Geurkink to the Growing for Market podcast. Sarah provides production support for commercial organic farms with the Organic Association of Kentucky, or OAK. Before that, she managed vegetable farms for 13 seasons. Sarah has an article in the February Growing for Market magazine called How to Work with Extension Agents and Other Folks Who Help Farmers, which is a topic that I wanted to dig into on the podcast because I've enjoyed the benefits of working with some excellent extension agents on my own farm over the years, and they can be such a great resource. My suspicion is that many farmers are not getting the full benefit of the people who are there to help them. I want to make sure farmers know who's there to help them, what help they can provide, and how to get a hold of them. So without further ado, let's get into it, Sarah.
Hey, Andrew, sounds good.
Okay. So before we get into what you're doing now, can you tell us a bit about your farming background?
Sure. Yeah, I farmed for the first time in 2010. It was a couple years out of college. I didn't really land on the thing I wanted to do. I thought I'll just do this for one season, be kind of a farm tourist. And then I said, I'll do it for one more season. And I just kept going. And so I worked at Groundswell Farm in West Michigan for 3 years. And then I moved to Seattle, Washington, and I got the job to manage the University of Washington campus farm.
Oh, wow.
Which was a market garden scale 2-acre farm on 3 sites around their Seattle campus. And then in 2017, I moved back to Michigan and became production manager and then farm manager at the Michigan State University Student Organic Farm. So that is a 15-acre farm. I think we produced on about 10 of those acres. It was a year-round CSA. We had 9 high tunnels and moved to Kentucky. And I do not farm here. I worked there for 5 years.
Okay, sorry, you worked where for 5 years?
I worked at the Michigan State University Student Organic Farm for 5 years.
Michigan, okay. Do you know Eli Wheat at University of Washington?
I do, yeah. And I heard him on your podcast. Eli was definitely one of my mentors and someone I looked up to a lot when I worked at the University of Washington. And he started the farm, and it was, super fun to see him again in that context on your podcast.
Yeah. Okay, I was thinking that was where he was at. So is he managing that farm now? Do I have that right? Or
no, he has his own farm on Whidbey Island, but he's a professor at University of Washington and teaches courses on farming. Perry Ackworth is the manager at the UW farm.
Okay, all right, that's right. He started it. Okay, so yeah, that's a fun thing is that if listeners want, they can go back and listen to Eli Wheat's interview with Katie Kula on the podcast, which I thought was a really good one. Okay, so you got quite a bit of background on farms. How did you get into offering technical assistance for farmers?
Yeah, well, I moved to Kentucky in 2022 because my spouse got a job at the University of Kentucky. I had farmed since 2010 until then for 13 seasons. The last couple years were a little hard because I had a baby and less time and energy. And I moved to Kentucky and 6 weeks later had another kid. So I was like, maybe this is a good opportunity to switch tracks. I got a position at University of Kentucky offering a sort of technical assistance that was more food systems based. And I'll just tell you a little bit about that. So the University of Kentucky has this really cool, unique program where they offer any employee who is on their healthcare plan a subsidy to a CSA share. So, which is about $200. So if you want to buy a CSA share and you're on the University of Kentucky healthcare plan, you get a voucher for $200 towards that CSA share with participating farms. And that program is largely administered by Oak, actually. And my job there was to reach out to universities around the country to sort of tell them about that program and if they were interested in piloting something similar to offer technical assistance on how to do that. So that is a very unique technical assistance position. This job at Oak came up and I was kind of realizing that I'm more interested in production farming and solving farm problems than food systems. So I then took this position in 2023 and I have been, so I'm like a baby TA provider. I've only been at it here at Oak for less than 3 years.
Yeah, but you have so much farming experience. I mean, I got to think you probably helped some farmers that you've been worked on farms longer than they have. So
I hope so. I guess my elevator pitch is that I can help farms with like planning, so pest management plans and crop plans and those sorts of things, or troubleshooting like emergency problems mid-season. And I think my main value is a lot of what I help farmers with, they could do themselves for sure, but they have like 8 million things to do. So if they could take something off their mental load and I can help out and find the information, yeah, it's really a fun job.
Yeah. Well, and I think that should be encouraging to farmers who want to work with a TA provider, because I know we've worked with a bunch of extension agents mostly on our farm, various things over the years, and a lot of them had farming experience too, which, not that you can't do a great job as a TA, which I'm not sure if we already said technical assistance, but TA is that abbreviation, which you taught me back when we were talking about your article in the February magazine. Because I guess, tell me if I got this right, but technical assistance providers would be like the whole universe of people helping farmers, extension agents being a segment of that, but technical assistance, I got the feeling that you were using technical assistance providers to be encompass like everybody who's trying to help farmers. And so I would think farmers would find that very encouraging, that a lot of the technical assistance providers out there have farming experience, just because I do feel like so many of the challenges on farms aren't necessarily like textbook problems, or there's so many things of just like stuff breaking down or like figuring out what your pests are and things. I think it's great that so many technical assistance providers do have farm experience like yourself.
I think it helps me envision when I give a recommendation, like sort of think about it, what that looks like in the real world. You know, so if you've got a zinc deficiency in your field, you got to apply 5 pounds per acre of zinc. Well, if you have, 30 acres of vegetables, how do you apply this 5 pounds of this powder per acre? So kind of understanding like a little bit about equipment and the physics of farming, I guess, the like mechanics of farming helps a bunch.
Yes, I think with all the sort of like where the rubber really meets the road kind of stuff, right? Because you could say, like, look up in a textbook and see, like, apply 5 pounds per acre. But then it's like, okay, how do I actually, that's not really very much. I mean, 5... Yeah. It's like a dusting, really, right? So something like, okay, so how do I actually do that? So 5 pounds per acre gets distributed evenly over an acre, and it's not all in one spot and all that kind of stuff. Like, those are the real world things that farmers, I think, find themselves out there in the field scratching their heads about. So that's super helpful. Hey, I just want to loop back really quickly on the subsidized CSA thing, because I remember you mentioning that too. And that's such a cool idea, because is that like a let food be your medicine kind of thing? Is the idea that if people will be more healthy if they subsidize the CSA share and they end up eating more vegetables?
Yeah, so many universities, including the University of Kentucky, are self-insured. So it's in their best interest to have healthy employees, because then their healthcare costs are lower. And so they have got a lot of really cool programs, from mental health stuff to physical health stuff. And yeah, one of them is the CSA voucher program. I mean, this could be an entire episode, and my colleagues who administer it, Katie and Natalie, would probably be better suited to give you the information about it. But I think it's a great program. And UK is the anchor institution that started working with farmers on it. And since more than a dozen employers throughout Kentucky have joined what we call the Kentucky Farm Share Coalition, and they offer a benefit similar to that to their employees. So the idea of my last job was if universities around the country would sort of pilot a program like that. They are an anchor institution, kind of an example institution, and they could maybe compel other employers to do the same. It's great for employee satisfaction. Like, your employer cares about your health. They care about local farms, and the farm gate impact of the program just in Kentucky is like $750,000 a year. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a real significant impact right there. I love it, right? It's helping people, encouraging people to get, healthy food from their local CSA. I think, of course, I'm going to think that's a great idea. Did you have luck getting other organizations to do the similar kind of program?
I did get a lot of interest, and there were folks who seemed to be getting close. And the key for that job was to find champions in the institutions who really would carry it forward. So I would say I found some champions that were super passionate and interested. I was there for a year. I don't know what resulted from it.
Okay, that I can see how that is probably a very long-term project, because I know like big institutions don't tend to move quickly. So actually, I would like to have a conversation with your colleagues who are still doing it, because I agree. I think that sounds like a whole conversation in itself. So we can leave it there and focus in more on what you're doing now, and maybe I'll loop back with you and see if your colleagues are interested in talking more about that program, because that sounds like that would be something that would be great for our audience if we could encourage more institutions to do. But so, yeah, tell me a bit more about what you're doing now. Like, what are the kinds of services that you provide to farmers now through Oak?
Yeah, so it was a new position with Oak. I think I'm going to back up a little and say that Kentucky has a very unique technical assistance landscape.
Okay.
And there's a whole history to it. But one of the reasons for that is the tobacco settlement, which provided funds that go towards helping Kentucky farmers to diversify their crops outside of tobacco. And then another is that sometime in the 70s or 80s, UK changed their extension model. You're probably better served to hear this from someone else who knows more about it than me. But so that, local counties fund the extension offices. And so whereas in a lot of states, state funding decreased for that kind of thing, the funding mechanism was different in Kentucky. So we have 120 counties. There's a county extension office in every single one of those counties. And there's a county extension agent in every county. And our counties are small. It's not that big of a state, 120 counties. So the density of technical assistance in Kentucky is pretty significant. And then my colleague, Dakota Moore, who I wrote the article with, works for the Kentucky Horticulture Council. And there are a number of folks there that work with growers. And we have organizations like the Kentucky Center for Ag and Rural Development, KCARD, which offers technical assistance in business planning. So we've got a huge array of technical assistance support for producers here, which is really unique and awesome. And then my job in particular is to offer production technical support for organic practicing growers who are commercial. So that's sort of my position. And one cool thing about being part of a nonprofit, being part of Oak, is that we can be very nimble and sort of see what growers need and pivot to that. So when I started, I didn't really know any farmers in Kentucky. I made a bunch of tools. I got a couple of requests and folks were asking to help make a crop plan or to help look at their soil tests and figure out what their fertilizer program needs to be this year. So I made a couple of tools, a crop planning tool, just so I wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel every time. It was mostly for me. And one that was a soil test data aggregation spreadsheet, just so I could look at people's soil test results all in one place. But then I was like, well, these tools are actually kind of helpful to put out there in the world. So they're on our website. And eventually I started getting sort of a more steady stream of farmer clients. And now, I help folks make crop plans, or if they, sometimes I go for a farm visit, and I wrote this in the article. I think it's a great idea to invite TA providers to your farm, just so that they kind of understand your context. I just learned a ton from these brilliant farmers. So selfishly, I enjoy going to farms just to see their crazy hacks. And I really, one of the things I like the most is matchmaking, right? So if I see a farmer who's doing something brilliant, and then I see a farmer who has a problem where that brilliant thing would help, just saying with the person's permission, so-and-so has this really cool rig that does this, and sort of having them chat and discuss different solutions to problems. So visiting a lot of farms has helped me be able to I obviously, I'm trying to provide evidence-based production assistance to folks, but sometimes the hack that farmer Susan has on her farm will really help farmer Tom. So sharing those sorts of things is really fun for me as well.
Yes. And that's one of the things you started sharing those through your social media. Is that right? When you see a good idea on a farm, you'll do a post about it?
Yeah, I snap a picture, and then on the first Friday of most months, I do like a series of stories around a theme. So there's one on fertigation, there's one on mechanical weed control. Just being like, so-and-so does it this way. So-and-so has this tool. This is how it works. And I want to give credit to Dan Filius because I've been following him for a long time. He had my job at Michigan State University before I did. And he has been posting on his Instagram. If the listeners don't know it, it's Iowa Veg Pro, something like that.
Yeah, Iowa Veg Pro support.
Exactly. And he's just like really good at identifying awesome farm things and then communicating it to the public. And I'd been watching that for a while. And then suddenly I was on a bunch of farms doing cool things. And I said, I have no original ideas. So I copied Dan.
Yeah, well, so it's funny you mentioned that because I had Dan on the podcast. In fact, by the time this interview is out, Dan's interview will have been a couple weeks before this one. So people might know more about Dan than they did before by the time this interview comes out. And he had a really good way of putting it. So in his interview, we were talking mostly about sweet corn, like whether you can actually make money on it or not. Because I know sweet corn everybody wants it, but it's notoriously maybe hard to make a profit on it. So we were talking about, well, if you can make profit on it and what the best practices were. But he had a great way of putting it. He said he wants to be like people's agricultural phone a friend. And he was encouraging people to call him or text him, like pictures of like, what is this bug and those kinds of things, which I thought was a really great way to put that. Because don't we all need an agricultural phone a friend from time to time?
Yeah. And it's like the best job also, Andrew. It's so fun.
I love farm tours. So I can see how it could be a really good job for someone who's farm interested and enthusiastic. And it makes so much sense to me too, because I think that farming can be a very lonely, solitary profession, like really depends. I know some people maybe in more populated areas have lots of people around them doing similar things that they can lean on, almost like a farm community 100 years ago, right? Where there were lots of people around you doing these things. But now that only like 1% of the population farms, you may or may not know anybody doing, exactly what you're doing. And so I realized that having people perhaps like yourself and Dan, who are visiting a lot of people, seeing what's going on multiple different farms. One of the benefits of that is that, as people are probably aware, farmers get very busy in the summertime and, probably don't have the time to go visit other farms a lot unless they're really close by. And so I think one of the values of extension or technical assistance providers is that you can be going to a lot of different farms and can tell farmers if what they're seeing is a trend. Like, oh yeah, everybody just got this pest this week. Just blew it on the wind or hit the degree days or whatever for it. Or like, no, this is just happening on your farm. We need to figure out why this is happening for you and not everybody else. So that's a really important function to be able to help farmers see like the bigger picture of what's going on their own farm in the context of, what's going on in the area. So I think that's really important. And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. Most CSAs don't lose members on price. They lose them because their systems break. In a recent 70-minute panel, 3 veteran CSA operators serving hundreds to thousands of members break down production planning, fulfillment, retention, and what they'd change for 2026. They talk honestly about what fails when you scale, how they protect member trust, and what actually drives renewals. Download the full conversation at farmhand.partners/GFM and see how the fastest growing farms are building smarter businesses. That's farmhand.partners/GFM. Farming is hard. Running it shouldn't be. Tend helps you plan your season, map your farm, and track every task from seed to sale. No spreadsheets, no guesswork, just seamless workflows. Tend is the all-in-one farm management platform that brings together planning, field mapping, fulfillment, real-time inventory, sales, labor, traceability, and accounting in one easy platform. built for small market gardens, CSAs, and large diversified farms. Get started with a free account at tend.com. That's TEND.com. No credit card required. And now, back to the show. And as I mentioned, so we'll link to your article in the February magazine in the show notes so everyone can read it and so you don't have to repeat yourself. But in that article, you use a term for folks who help farmers, the technical assistants or TA providers. And that was a term that I was unfamiliar with. Like I said, I was more familiar with the term extension agent. I guess they came up with that term, right? Because the extension agent was, do you tell me, but it was originally like with land grant universities, the idea was that they would extend themselves. They would go out into the community, right? And share the knowledge.
Yeah, as I understand it, like there are specialists, research faculty, extension faculty at the university discovering all these things. And then the extension agent's job is to kind of proliferate that information out into the community.
Uh-huh. Okay, so like a link between this more like, I don't know, like research stuff that's going on at the land grant universities and then
bring it to the real world.
Farmers that are actually out there. Yeah, putting it to use. Okay. So I guess it sounds like extension agents are a subset of technical assistance providers. So can you tell us all the types of people who would be classified as TA providers? And part of the reason I'm asking this is so that people know like where they might be able to go, like what organizations are employing technical assistance providers, right? Because I can think of like extension, then there's places like Oak, or like in Maine we have MOFGA, the Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association, which has similar kind of people. But does that make sense? Like are there other people? So I'm thinking extension, and then there's TA providers from organic institutions like Oak and MOFGA. Are there other people we should be looking out for who fall into that category of folks who help farmers?
Yeah, I guess I think university, land grant sort of folks. There's NGOs, sort of like Oak and Fair Share and Marble Seed and MOFGA, those sorts of organizations. And then I think of government-based organizations, so like NRCS or FSA. I think, I don't know exactly. Dakota and I use the term technical assistance providers to like kind of encompass all of these folks who provide one-on-one support and talking through problems. So that could be like on markets or diseases or trends or production techniques. And some folks do that in the form of coming up with lay-friendly publications that relay research information. Some folks are doing it via newsletters. Some folks are visiting farms. So I guess it was a sort of a big tent term for all of those folks. And the idea being that, no one technical assistance provider is going to give you all the things you need, but hopefully we can all work together to kind of provide a scaffold of support, I think are the words I used, just to meet all the needs.
Yeah, which is so important because, I think that's one thing that keeps agriculture interesting, but no two seasons are exactly alike. And so I think you can get into a situation where even a very experienced farmer is experiencing like a pest or a disease or weather phenomenon, anything for the first time, even though they might have been doing it for a while.
And I think when I was farming, well, I should say out loud that I never started my own farm. I was sort of an institutional farmer. I worked for a commercial farm and then I worked for 2 university farms. And even so, when I was farming, I thought I could figure out this problem that I'm having. Like, I'm capable of figuring it out, so I shouldn't ask for help. Or a step further, I was like, I work at a university farm. I should know the answer to this question. But I think that I wish that I had realized I can figure all this stuff out, but there are more things than I have time for. And so I should outsource some of this stuff. And then there are like smarter people than me. And I eventually did. I would say I relied a lot on sales reps for companies. And I became very good at asking for help in my later years of farming. But for a long time, I thought like, because I can figure this out, I should figure it out. But I think that's the benefit of a technical assistance provider is they could, if you need to look at a fertigation system, you want to like revamp your system. If somebody came up to me and said, hey, I want to revamp my fertigation system, can you like give me a few options and how complicated those options are and how expensive those options are? You know, I could talk through that with them because I've seen lots of fertigation systems that work. And then if I get that question enough, I make a First Friday's highlights about it on Instagram. So I could just refer people to like actual pictures so that people can see what things look like. And when I don't know the answer to questions, I really like going and finding them from people who do know the answers. And then I make a Google document for everyone, most people I work with, that has like the answers to all their questions and sort of a live document that they can refer to whenever. And I have a Google document that I call my matriarch. And that's where like everyone's answers goes. And I like categorize that. So as I help people, direct people to resources or answers, I then have this huge catalog of answers that I can sort of refer to and quickly provide the technical assistance later, if that makes sense. Sort of my directory of farm answers or of resources.
Yeah, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. That's great that you're keeping track of all that. I'm sure that's very useful. So how do people get connected with you in the first place? I mean, so they approach Oak and Oak sees they have a technical issue and they connect them with you?
We have a form online on our website, and it's just asks for their basic information, partly for grant reporting and partly to introduce me to kind of what their farm is like, what their enterprises are, acreage, and problems, basically. That, you know, it's not that detailed. It's like, I would like help with fertility or whatever. And then I schedule a call, either on the phone or Zoom, whatever their preference is. And we chat. I offer a couple of like initial resources that make sense based on our conversation. And then, you know, we decide together whether a farm visit makes sense. And if they're not quite at the commercial level, my position is written into the grant such that I have to work with commercial farmers. So then I can make referrals. I could share the tool, the crop planning tool. I could share the price reports from the Center for Crop Diversification at the University of Kentucky. I can share information about the University of Kentucky's Beginning Farmer program. So, you know, I can send not yet commercial farmers some initial information or refer them to the right folks. Or I end up working with them and come visit their farm and stuff. And then I really love your description or Dan's description of the phone a friend, because I get texts of pictures of leaves and stuff, and I know the answer 50% of the time, and the other percent of the time I say, I don't know, let me ask somebody else.
Yeah, well, that was Dan's point about that, is he said he can't tell people what is going on with the, like the weird leaf spot or whatever 100% of the time. But, his point was that sending it for a lab test might take a while, a week or two. And that if he can help someone know 80% of the time what it is in quickly enough that they can do something about it, that's a huge value right there of just having somebody to ask. Because somebody knows, right? Like unless it's an invasive species that nobody's seen in North America or something, right? Like chances are whatever problem you're having on your farm, somebody knows what it is and somebody else has experienced it before, probably. And so just that quick, being able to quickly get an answer is worth so much. Like even if they don't know 100% of the time, this being able to ask somebody and get an answer, even if it's I don't know, get it really quickly is very valuable to farmers, obviously, right? Who need to make a decision about like how to fertilize, what to spray or whatever.
Yeah. Again, the Kentucky technical assistance landscape is pretty sweet. We are unique in that we have actually service for commercial growers, which is you get free pathology on diseased plants. So you can just take it to your county extension office, and then the county extension office mails it to the lab at UK. And it's a free service, which is pretty cool. And so one of the things I occasionally do is I show folk, if I'm on their farm anyway and I see a disease, I'm like, do you want to send that in for diagnosis, and I show them like, how to take the sample. And sometimes I'll deliver it because I live in Lexington, right by the university as well. The lab there, the folks in the lab there are really, really great.
Yeah. Well, that's an amazing.
So here it's like a few days turnaround, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. That sounds like a lot of technical support there in Kentucky, I got to say, because here in Maine, we have 16 counties. And so, yeah, sounds like a lot to have 120 counties and they all have their own extension agent. Although I'm guessing one of the values of you there at Oak is that you'll know the like organic solutions to issues that farmers are having. Because I know that that's a value that I get out of MAFCA here in Maine. They've had for a long time, oh gosh, I think they call him a crop specialist. For a long time it was Eric Seidman, and now it's Caleb Goosen, who's writing a monthly column for the magazine about pests and diseases. And I think part of the value of having someone probably like at Oak or at MAFCA is that they know how to solve the problem without using chemicals. Not that university extension agents might, but I know some of them take a very conventional approach to agriculture. And at least like our farmers certified organic. A lot of obviously not everybody in the Growing for Market audience is certified organic, but I know a lot of our audience is either certified organic or organic but uncertified kind of grower, trying not to grow with a lot of chemicals. And so I see that as a particular benefit. And that's actually why I called on Caleb, because when I wanted to start this feature about, just have an article about a pest and disease every month, right? Because there's a lot of them out there. And also because the way we archive the articles here at Growing for Market, I thought if we do an article about a pest or disease every month until we've run out of pests and diseases, but I'm sure there will be more invasives. Like I don't think we'll ever run out, but that if we ever do, it's all archived. And so it'll create this archive of pest and disease info that people can just go and search. So I imagine one day after we've been doing this for a little longer, we'll have a nice, fairly comprehensive group of articles about how to deal with pests and diseases, particularly organically.
That's very cool. Yeah, I really like that article that happens monthly.
Yeah. So I imagine since we do have a national in North American audience, it's going to vary a lot, right? Because I know, for example, here in Maine, we're lucky to have MAFCA, and I think MAFCA actually has 2 organic crop specialists now. And then, like, I know when I was talking with Dan, he was saying, I think they have county extension agents, but he's like the guy for vegetable production for the whole state, because Iowa has a lot of corn and beans. So that's why I want to ask you, like, where people could go to find people like yourselves, right? Because I know it just really varies by state, right? Some states are going to have more. And I think that if people are looking specifically for organic or non-chemical advice, that really depends on the state, because it sounds like, there in Kentucky that you've got Oak, here we've got MAFCA, but I don't think every state has a sort of like an organic association. And I don't know that every state that has an organic association has an extension agent. I'm just not sure, but I do want to just encourage people, know that that's a place for people to look. If they're struggling with something, they can at least go look those places for some help.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm going to just reiterate, so we talked about extension agents kind of extending the research of universities out into the real world. And those specialists who are like I can only speak for Kentucky. The specialists are the kind of researchers and experts on that topic. So we have like an awesome plant pathologist. We have an awesome vegetable productions, commercial vegetable specialist, those sorts of things. I often go to them when I don't know an answer, or I want to confirm, I made a fertility plan for this person. Can you check it out? Let me know, whatever. I always connect with the extension agent from that grower's county, and I say, hey, I'm helping so-and-so. Is there any context I should know, or do you want me to keep you in the loop on what I help them with? And I've gotten to know a ton of extension agents, and for the most part, sometimes they're like, cool, great, I'm very busy. Sometimes they're like, oh, that's great. Yeah, let me know. I'll come with you. So it's been great to connect with the extension sort of landscape in Kentucky and sort of connect personally with extension agents. And then anytime I email a specialist, or most of the time, I try to remember to copy the extension agent just so that the answer that specialist provides me also goes to that farmer's local extension agent, just so that everybody's in the loop. And that farmer, I think as a farmer, I loved having as many people as I could in my corner. Like I knew who I went to for fertility questions, for irrigation questions, and some of those folks were sales reps, some of those folks were university people, some of them were other farmers, and I encourage people to have as many supporters in your corner as possible as you can stand or have time for.
Yeah. Well, that's why I want farmers to know that they're out there, because, I think a lot of farmers are very independent minded, but also, especially in the growing for market audience, I think direct market farmers tend to be small businesses. They tend to wear a lot of hats, right? And so it's like, if there's these people out there whose job is to help you take one of those hats off, like you can take the entomologist hat off, right? And like, draw on your crop specialist or your TA provider to solve your bug problems. I think that can mean a lot for farmers. Is there any point in talking about what kind of services are provided by TA providers, or is it worth just saying, like, if you have a problem, look at the kind of people that we just talked about and just reach out and see if they can help with whatever their farmer's problem is?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm like beginning to really understand the landscape here in Kentucky. I don't think I came even close to like fully exploring the landscape in Michigan, and I really didn't explore it at all in Washington. So I know that in Kentucky, there are a couple of organizations that help with business planning, and there are, so you can like do one-on-one meetings with someone who will help you build a business plan. And the Center for Crop Diversification is an awesome organization, and they do, price reports from farmers markets. They do lots of sort of events where growers and buyers meet up. They mainly make great resources for extension agents to use to help the growers. And I often chat with those folks and ask them for advice, or do you have an article on this? They publish a lot of the sort of extension publication articles that are coming from the researchers. They're the ones that sort of send them out for peer review and make them readable and put them out there in the world. So they're sort of a clearinghouse for ag knowledge, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, you never know what people might be able to help you with. Like, one example that just came to my mind was that, we're here in Maine. You're probably aware Maine is a big potato growing state. And so when we wanted to build a walk-in cooler for our farm, we got help. I think it was from the Maine Potato Board, or like, I forget. It's been a while since we did this project, but they build a lot of what they call potato houses up here in Maine. They're big, like, a lot of times they're partially sunken buildings, or like built into a hillside for just banking, tons and tons of potatoes, right? And so even though the walk-in cooler that we wanted to build was a lot smaller than your typical potato house, they had people who helped farmers design and build those things. And so we were able to get a grant not only to help us build it, but then we got help from someone on the state potato, like, I forget, but somebody who designs those things, to help us design a little walk-in cooler that was the same kind of thing. Like, it was partially sunken, and then, it was basically a big concrete box that was partially sunken and then covered with soil, just to try to make it as the climate as stable as possible. And so it was kind of like a mini potato house. I guess that's what we ended up building, but it was just super helpful for us to have that resource to draw upon and not just have to be like, make it up from scratch ourselves. So.
And how did you find them?
I should ask my wife. I think she tracked them down. I should have done my homework on that one. Yeah, I'll ask her, but maybe through extension. That's a good question. I'm not sure how we actually got hooked up with them. But that's why I want people to know that these resources are out there, because it's worth asking, right? If people have a challenge on their farm, there might be someone who can help. And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. If you grow for market, you know performance is everything. That's why so many farmers are turning to Burpee's Farmers Market. Dedicated to professional growers, Burpee is now offering non-GMO seeds in larger quantities, bred and selected for standout flavor, strong yields, and the kind of visual appeal your customers crave. All farmers market varieties are trialed at Burpee's Research Farm in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, where expert horticulturalists test for germination rate, vigor, disease resistance, high yield, and consistency, things that make a difference in the field and to your bottom line. The seed assortment includes USDA certified organic varieties, Burpee bred classics, heirlooms, and exciting new introductions. Burpee's been doing this for 150 years, and they're still creating new varieties with growers like you in mind. You can check out the full lineup at burpee.com/farmersmarket. That's burpee.com/farmersmarket. And now back to the show. Okay, so in your article, you talked about being able to loop in other service providers if a farmer asks for support that's outside of your area of expertise. Like the example you give, I think the example you gave in the article was talking about someone who needed grazing help. And I'm not sure if every TA provider has the ability to loop. Like, I imagine it's part of its budgeting, right? Because I imagine you had to bring somebody else in who had expertise on grazing. And I think you said you were able to learn from that what the grazing consultant or whoever it was. But how does that work for you? If you need to, like, if you think like, oh, somebody knows this, but I don't, how are you able to network with other TA providers?
Yeah, I've been really lucky. People are super open to visiting farms and excited about visiting farms. So in this particular example, we had a grant and we were offering a very specific type of technical assistance for our soil health project, which folks can learn about on our website. And we didn't really have any staff that had as much experience in grazing systems. So we are working with Greg Brand and Victor Shelton. And I've mostly worked with Greg anytime I visit. For this particular grant, a farm that has grazing, Greg does the consultation on the grazing part to make their management plan. So yeah, the example I gave is of Joseph and Abby Monroe and Abby Scott Monroe's farm, Valley Spirit Farm. And they have 10 or 15 acres of vegetables, and then they have a cattle herd that they manage. They do a lot of crop livestock integration, and I can help with the crop part, not as much with the livestock part. And so touring around with Greg, and those grazing people, they can just like look at a field and like understand what is going on in ways that I can't. It's like a different language or something. But I learned a ton from him about different rotation schemes, bale grazing, bale unrolling, the merits of different techniques that I just wasn't that familiar with. My husband and I had like a really small sheep herd at home in Michigan when we lived there. It was just like homestead. So I'm learning a lot of what I did wrong back then. Actually, that's a big part of my job in general, learning what I did wrong at my previous farming endeavors. But anyway, it was great to work with Greg. And yeah, the advice he gave to farmers in those visits kind of were like, okay, mental note. That's something I now know when I see this problem in a pasture system or whatever. So super helpful. But even outside of this project, if I needed someone to help with grazing, occasionally I will text Greg or give him a call and he's happy to help. But I can reach out to any of the grazing specialists at University of Kentucky and ask them specific questions and they'll answer. And a couple of them have said like, yeah, totally, I'll visit farms. I think I mostly get questions from vegetable growers, which is great. But, I do work with row crop producers and livestock producers. And that's when I have to sort of outsource some of that information finding.
Yeah. Well, that's a help to farmers too, right? If you say like, okay, this is not my area of expertise, but I can help you network with somebody, right? I mean, that's a help to farmers right there, just to help them find the right person.
Yeah. I really like referring farmers to other professionals, but one of my favorite things is referring farmers to other farmers. Like any opportunity I have to like go on a road trip with farmers I know will get along is great. And then I'm just like a fly on the wall while they talk about all this cool stuff. Yeah. I think what I have found, my favorite thing that farmers have gotten a lot out of is connecting with each other in ways that like maybe they didn't know the person because like, I don't know, they're very busy and they live in rural Kentucky, like 2 hours from this other person, but then they connect and it makes me very happy. And I think it makes them very happy.
Yeah, like I was saying, like farming can be isolated, and so it sounds like you're like a farmer matchmaker.
Yes.
So
yes, I have actually referred to myself as that.
Okay, maybe you might have even mentioned that. You might have planted that seed in my mind, but that's a very cool thing.
And also, not all farmers want that, and I, read the room before I do it.
Yeah, right on. I mean, that's actually one thing that's I think is very cool about the market farming community is that they tend to be very sharing. I mean, that's why Growing for Market has existed for 35 years, right? Because people are willing to write about what they're doing on their farms for other farmers. And, I think it's the mission behind Growing for Market. And I think of what you're doing too, is that, I think the most innovative people in farming are farmers, right? Because they're like, equipment's breaking, they're figuring out they got a plant today, so they're figuring out how to fix it before the actual parts come and stuff like that. So, I think that's a huge value of what you're doing, is making those connections and sharing where people want it shared. So I guess that's what I'm getting at, is I think my theory is that because people in market farming are not trying to dominate a whole region, state, even like in my previous life in the seed industry, I would go to greenhouses that sometime were many tens of acres, and were potentially competing with greenhouse growers anywhere else in the country, right? And so I'm contrasting that. Some of those kinds of growers were very clear. They were like, didn't want anything shared from their operation, and I always respected that. But it's kind of a contrast. And it's just, some of them were very sharing. It was just, it was like you said, read the room. And they were usually very clear. Like some greenhouses I'd go into, they'd be like, take pictures, take notes, whatever you want. I go into some greenhouses that were like, no pictures. If you take notes, we're going to keep them when you leave. It's like for your, just look around. And it's like I said, I love farm tours. I do it either way, but it's a really refreshing thing about the market farming communities. They tend to be pretty sharing. And my theory is that nobody's trying to own the market for like carrots in North America or anything. So they're like, well, they're not like, we got to keep our secret carrot growing tips or else our competitors will get them. So that's really nice, because it makes possible what we do here at the magazine.
Yeah. Greg Brand randomly texted me and said, that fellow we visited, the first person I toured their farm with you, I just had an idea for them. Can you share this? And then like, that just like really warmed my heart. And I was like, here's his number. And also, yes, I'll share it. And also, please connect. That's like my favorite thing ever. Just so sweet. And I think once farmers meet and get to know each other, they really do want to like connect and share ideas. And yeah, I somehow accidentally, I think, got on this thread of a bunch of really great growers here in Kentucky who will occasionally be like, does anybody have a good potato harvester they like or whatever? And yeah, sometimes I'm a fly on the wall in those kinds of conversations. It's really fun to see folks sharing their experiences.
Yeah. Well, I think that's even more important now that such a small percentage of the overall population is farming, right? Because I think about like my great-grandparents and grandparents farmed, and I heard a lot about what they were doing, and they had a community around them of a bunch of people doing the same things that they could, like, barn raising is like the classic example of like farmers helping out farmers. But I think there was a community when, like, I don't, a third or something of the population was farming, or when more people were farming, you had more people that you could ask how they're solving those problems. And so now that we're like 1% or something of the population farming. I think that's being a matchmaker between farmers and their ideas is probably even more important because we don't have as much of a community as we used to. So I think we need people like yourself to help knit it together. So thank you.
I think you could do a whole episode on this, and I am not the most knowledgeable person about it, but the tobacco farming in Kentucky is a great example of that. I mean, producing tobacco is a very communal experience. Neighbors helped neighbors harvest and process and things. And when Kentucky, kind of lost that as a major cash crop, the agricultural landscape changed a lot. And you should have someone on the podcast who knows more about that than me. But it's a pretty interesting big change that happened recently here.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I'm glad you brought up the whole tobacco thing again, because I'm going to ask you a question, and if you don't know the answer, that's fine, because I know, like you said, you've been in Kentucky for 3 years or so, but I'm curious if you know if a lot of tobacco producers made the switch to vegetables or other like specialty crops or flowers or anything like that. And part of the reason I ask is because, so I grew up in Virginia, and so I know that tobacco production actually has more similarities, I feel like, with vegetable or flower production than, say, row crop production in a lot of ways. Like, I know that particularly when I was working for the Virginia Tech research farm in Blacksburg, so like southwestern Virginia, they had all these old speedlings. I don't know if you know, speedlings are these particular styrofoam. They're like seed starting flats, but they're made out of styrofoam.
Yeah.
And so what they had all these. So back at the research farm at Virginia Tech, they had all these like just like these piles and piles of speedling trays there, because what they said is that was a thing that a lot of tobacco growers used to grow their transplants. So what I mean about tobacco farming being more similar to vegetable or flower farming is that it's dissimilar to corn or bean farming, for example, in that you're making a transplant, right? Because what I was told is that a fairly low-tech way for growers to make their tobacco transplants was to plant them in the speedlings. And so because they were these styrofoam seed starting flats that have kind of like a pyramidal shape, that they could put the seeds in the trays and then float them on shallow float beds. And so it strikes me that I think I actually have seen vegetable and flower growers using speedlings, but not very much anymore. But, the point being that I could see how if you were used to making transplants and there's some hand labor involved with tobacco, you could translate a lot of those skills over to vegetables or flowers.
Yeah, I have seen those the trays, but also like vacuum seeders that were specifically used for tobacco growing. And then there are a lot of old cultivating tractors here, and there are a lot of old tobacco setters here. All these, things that could be used to cultivate organic vegetables and transplant vegetable, those tobacco setters are perfect for a lot of transplants. And I think a lot of them came from a mechanical transplanter in Holland, Michigan, the company.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, there's like a lot of good used equipment, some of which is like in the weeds at some farm. You just have to find it. But Facebook Marketplace is full of like old farmalls and stuff that I suspect is from the tobacco days.
Yeah, probably. Yes, fence row is a great source of equipment for market farms. And that's one thing that came up with Dan Filius in our interview about the sweet corn. Is just that there's a lot of equipment that by today's standards is really small. Is like smaller than like big corn producers are using, but is actually is like appropriately scaled, like 4-row corn planters and transplanters and stuff like that. That is probably obsolete by most growers' standards that you could probably, but is like good equipment that growers might.
Diversified farm is perfect.
Yeah. So yes, those kinds of tips are definitely worthwhile for market farmers. Actually, speaking of tools, I know you made some tools for farmers, and I think you talked about them a little bit at the top of the interview, but I wanted to give you an example because they looked like really great resources. And I think you sent me the URLs for them also, so we can link them in the show notes. But just like, I think that's a really great example of like one thing you're doing for farmers. Like you mentioned them, but I want to give you a chance to talk about, if you'd like to talk about the resources that you've been working on for farmers, because that's a great example of just of like one way that you're helping farmers.
Yeah, I started making them before I knew any farmers, but my job was to help farmers. Like, I guess I'll just make some tools. I think I came up with them just sort of thinking about like what was, when I was a beginning farmer, what was like hard. You know, I remember being at the UW farm. It was the first farm that like I was solely in charge of before I had worked for a farmer. And I had to make a crop plan out of nowhere. And there are lots of example crop plans. Some of them are behind a paywall. You know, I wasn't super Excel savvy. Crop planning was a big headache. So I was like, okay, what can I bring from my farming years and make it like at MSU, we had a very big Excel file full of macros that was like just so cumbersome, impossible to email to people, you know, and so I was like, well, what if I do this? Oak uses the Google Suite. So what if I do this on a Google spreadsheet? And then my colleague's husband helped me do the programming part. But the crop plan is you basically input what crops you want when and how many and what bed feet, what spacing, what crop variety, spacing, bed feet, date, all that stuff. And, days to transplant. Then you click on generate plans, generate greenhouse schedule, and it'll calculate, do the math on when you have to seed things, when you have to put things out to harden off, and when you transplant things or whatever. Depending on what you input, it'll do the math for the rest of the information. And then you hit generate plans, generate planting plan or field plan, or I don't remember the wording exactly that I put on there. And then it'll come up with your field planting schedule. So it all kind of reads from your main crop plan. And then you can have those two printed plans, one for the nursery greenhouse and one for the field planting, where it says exactly what spacing to plant things in and how many rows per bed and things like that. So you can plan all that stuff ahead of time and you don't have to check throughout the season, which is just a regular crop plan. But if you're a new farmer, it's nice to not have to start it from scratch.
Yeah, very cool. Well, exactly. I mean, that's exactly the example, is that like you don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? It's one of those things like, somebody else has made a crop plan, why start from scratch? So that's so awesome that you made that and have made that available. So we'll link that in the show notes if people want to give it a shot.
Yeah, and I have a record keeping tool which folks can use sort of like on the computer, or they could add apps on their phones like Google Forms. So they can fill out, anytime they spray or anytime they do a field activity, so that you can sort of do I'm doing all the things I should have done when I was farming. I didn't have this setup when I was farming, but I wished I had. And it was on my forever to-do list. And then there's one that's just my colleague at MSU, Katie, actually started this, and I tweaked it a bit to use here. And you put your soil test results in and it automatically color codes the numbers so that you can kind of visualize what's low and what's high and adequate. And you can put your soil tests on all your different fields from several years. So you can see how things change over time, how things are different from field to field. Because when I'm looking at somebody's soil tests, if they have 5 or 6 of them, I'm like flipping back and forth, and it ends up being very confusing. And I'm like, where do I find which field this is again? So it was just helpful for me in my technical assistance. And I thought it would be helpful for the actual farmers too.
Oh yeah. Color coding is so much better than like, what is the right range for potassium again?
Yeah.
Yeah. That sounds very handy.
Yeah. And then I borrowed, again, I have very few original ideas, so I love MVeg's resources. And I personally was new to farming in Kentucky, and I didn't know where people were getting things. So, I made a document similar to what MVeg has. Their like resources document. Where do farmers buy clamshells or trays or whatever, but for Kentucky specific, so that I could refer to it when I was helping someone who's looking for something. But then I just published it as well, just so that it's out there. I think that's it. I'm working on a kind of fertility plan template so folks can plan at the beginning of the season what they're going to put down pre-plant or side dress or fertigate and kind of refer to that throughout the season.
Very cool. All right. Well, we'll link those in the show notes. And, Sarah, that's really the questions that I had for you. Is there anything else I should have asked you or that you'd like to say before we let you go?
I guess, yes, there is something. For farmers who are thinking that they can figure it all out themselves, yeah, it's true, you probably can, but it's really nice to connect with a human being who also has a brain. Add more brains to your problems. There's so many problems to solve in farming, from like spreadsheet to bank accounts to oil change on the tractor. So if you can outsource some of the mental load onto TA providers, or at least just have a person to bounce your ideas off of. Sometimes growers call me and just say, hey, I'm thinking about doing that. And then you talk through it. And really, I don't help at all. I'm just listening. And they come up with a solution. It's just nice to have a person. So if you meet a TA provider that just like doesn't fit the bill or isn't a good fit, I guess I'm encouraging folks not to give up and just look for someone else or keep trying with them. There will be people who will come to your corner, and then that's just super nice and less lonely that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good point, because I feel like I have talked with farmers who maybe like organic farmers who worked with an extension agent that wasn't really familiar with organic solutions for problems. And so it might be worth saying, like, don't, like you just said, keep looking and don't be discouraged if the first TA providers isn't the best fit, because they're like, different people have specialties. And I know, and it may even, I think in some places it may depend on what's being grown there. Like, people may specialize in the most common crops grown in an area, and that may not be what people are growing. So keep looking. Yeah.
It's kind of like, be willing to weather being the weirdo asking a new question to a TA provider. They might have just, maybe they're anti-organic or whatever. I think it's more likely that they've just been answering the same questions for years, and they like quickly know the answer. And when you ask them a question they don't know the answer to, they might just be taken aback and need a minute and need to be asked again, or need to be asked more specifically, can you refer me to someone who knows? I think that most folks are willing to help, even if it's outside of their wheelhouse or preference or value systems. Maybe I'm too much of an optimist, but at any rate, they're a public servant and it is their job. So you can hold them to account.
Yeah. Well, I've had really good luck working with mostly extension agents in my case, but so TA providers. I've had really good luck with TA providers, and so I would encourage people to look them up. And I just think what you're doing is awesome, Sarah. I'm so glad to know that you are there helping farmers, and obviously you're there in Kentucky, but I want people to know a lot of states and provinces have people like you that could help them with whatever's going on the farm. And so I'm so glad to know you're out there. And I want to encourage growers to get in touch, because you could be one phone call away from your new farm phone a friend, right? And I think that's just almost like could be the message of this whole conversation, is that there are good, knowledgeable people out there, growers whose job it is to help you.
Yeah.
So get in touch with them.
Yeah. I didn't even talk about how one of the great things that came out of having this job, even though I'm in Kentucky, is like relationships with people like Sam Oswald-Tilton and Dan Filius and Natalie Hoytel, who I'm just getting to know, like really smart people from around the country who are very willing to brainstorm ideas or troubleshoot problems. So reaching out, getting in touch with one extension agent or TA provider will often connect you to many, or at least get many TA provider brains on your problem.
Yeah, you guys are maybe an informal network, but you guys can have a network, I'm sure, of yourself. And like, I know Like University of Vermont has some great technical assistance. We've had like Vern Grubinger was on not that long ago talking about high tunnel tomato production. There's Chris Callahan and a couple other guys from University of Vermont were talking about food safety handling. Yeah, there's just some great resources out there. So I feel like that's the take home is if people are struggling with something, reach out. There's people out there who are, their job is to help you. Farming is hard enough. Take all the help you can get. So I hope this conversation has encouraged them to do so. And it's funny you mentioned Sam Oswald-Tilton, because he wrote an article a number of years ago for Growing for Market about walk behind tractors. And one of the interesting thing in his article was he was talking about, he went to some like walk behind tractor graveyard. I forget where it was, but it was like, they had like acres and acres of old walk behind tractors. And it kind of showed how much less agriculture is going on now, because, his point was that it used to be a lot more common to have like a truck patch or a small market garden or something like that. As you could see by this like huge graveyard of walk behind tractors. And I think that makes the network like you're talking about of people like yourself who, if you don't know the answer, maybe, you'll contact Sam or Dan or one of your other colleagues and really kind of like a mycelial network, of knowledge, like tap into all this knowledge and goodwill of people like yourself who want to help farmers and have experience at it. So I just want people to realize that it's there and encourage them to tap into it. So on that note, where can people find you and Oak, either online or social media or wherever you'd like people to look you up?
Yeah, well, just so I don't get it wrong, you can find Oak at Organic Association of Kentucky on Instagram and Facebook. Our website is oak-ky.org, and you can look for information about the Organic Production Assistance Program, but also those tools that I referenced. Oregon Tilth is actually going to translate those into Spanish, which is pretty cool. And yeah, we have a great annual conference and we record all of our conference sessions. So you can check out the cool presentations that happen there. And yeah, reach out to me at my email address is sarah@oak-ky.org. Happy to chat with anyone.
Okay, perfect. Sarah, you're awesome. I'm so glad that just to know that you're there helping farmers. And I'm so glad that you talked with us about it on the podcast today. I think it's going to be a real encouraging and an asset for farmers. So thank you so much for what you do.
Thanks
really
for having
appreciate
me.
it.
Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, sure. All right. Bye, Sarah.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Growing for Market podcast. If you've been enjoying the show, please consider giving us a follow and a rating or a review. It really helps others find the podcast. For more tips and tricks from farmer to farmer, check out our magazine at growingformarket.com. Whether you're a commercial grower or just want to grow like one, subscribe to Growing for Market magazine for the nitty-gritty of growing, marketing, and the business of market farming. We publish 10 issues per year with articles written by experienced farmers on topics ranging from tools and techniques to farm business operations and marketing. If you've been listening to the Growing for Market podcast and haven't yet checked out Growing for Market magazine, we've made a change so you can try the magazine for free. We've added a free month to the beginning of all first-time subscriptions. Try out the digital or paper magazine for a month, and if it's not for you, cancel within 28 days and you'll never even get billed. All subscriptions get you a year of the magazine, plus 150 downloadable back issues from the last 15 years and over 1,700 archived articles. With digital subscriptions starting at just $39 a year, head on over to growingformarket.com and subscribe today to benefit from over 3 decades of writing by farmers, for farmers, in Growing for Market magazine.